Well, I'd like to welcome you all here today to this discussion on seeking radical breakthroughs in alternative energy. I'm Ernest Moniz, director of the MIT Energy Initiative, which with the XPRIZE Foundation, the MIT XPRIZE Lab, the Energy Club are all trying to bring every tool we can find to apply to this great challenge about changing our trajectory with regard to energy and environment in this century. Literally shifting a multi-trillion-dollar-a-year business is an important and difficult task, but one I think which we have some hope for with the great flowering, really, of the entrepreneurial spirit in clean energy. Just a reminder that we often talk about this kind of perfect storm of challenges to meet in the energy and the environment, the great demand for energy supply, particularly from the emerging economies, where lifting living standards is generally associated with energy supply. Clearly, alternative energy is going to have to be a major part of that supply, along with demand responses to meet our environmental goals. Energy security, another great challenge. Well, energy security isn't about the sun or the wind, it's about fossil fuels. Alternative energy, once again, critical pathway to pursue. Environment, climate change in particular, where we all know the clock is ticking away in terms of a serious response to literally wring gigatons of carbon out of our energy system. Once again, alternative energy. And so today's discussion clearly is focused at the kinds of solutions that we really need across the board in this space. Again, and in addition, approaches involve, of course, technology and policy. The issue here of our presidential election year invokes the specter of our rather tired policy and our need to change. But in the end, it's going to be new technologies that really provide alternative energies economically, which is the global response. So again, I think what we are focused on here today really is the heart of the challenge. I'm going to introduce Peter Diamandis, who will be the impresario of today's discussion. Peter, I won't go through his biography, but he has a rather eclectic collection of degrees from Cambridge institutions, Harvard and MIT, in life sciences, medicine, aero-astro. He was named in 1994, what was it exactly? Top 25 young stars of space. And we want to congratulate him that only one of those words is now obsolete, young. But most importantly, Peter is the founder and chairman of the XPRIZE Foundation, this idea of really stimulating innovation through competition. Those of you who have read David Sobel's book shortly after his award in 1994 know the Longitude Prize as provides a 3-century-old history of the effectiveness of pursuing innovation through competition. And now, of course, we hope that we will see the same results now as the XPRIZE turns to alternative energy as a source of innovation through competition. Peter?
And, I also won first place in SD's design contest when I was 9. So it's a real pleasure to be back here at MIT. I love this place. It is an incredible place where anything is literally possible, at least if abides by the laws of physics. I am also proud to have the XPRIZE lab at MIT. I just came from teaching a class there, and we'll hear a little bit more about that in a little bit. Let me tell you a little bit about the mission of the XPRIZE Foundation. With our partners like BT, we are out to bring about radical breakthroughs. That is fundamentally what we're looking to do. The origin of this is from my childhood. I had always wanted to fly in space. I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to go explore space. And along the way, I got convinced that NASA would not be the way I would do it, that opening it up privately was for me. And I read a book called The Spirit of St. Louis that Lindbergh wrote, and I found that Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic to win a $25,000 prize. And that $25,000 prize drove 9 teams to spend $400,000, and it really brought about a tremendous amount of innovation. That inspired me to create the Ansari XPRIZE, a $10 million prize for the first team to build a 3-person spaceship, go 100 kilometers into space, and 2 weeks again do it again. We had $100 million spent by 26 teams. Incredible, and now you can go and buy a ticket to fly privately into space. On the day that the Ansari XPRIZE was won, Google changed their Google Doodle to have Spaceship One flying over it. And we were able then to expand the mission to go out and bring radical breakthroughs in other areas. We brought Larry Page on our board, Ray Kurzweil, Craig Venter, and really expanded our mission. And have since then have launched 3 prizes. The Archon X Prize for genomics, $10 million for the first team to sequence 100 human genomes in 10 days. We have Dr. George Church as one of the teams competing for that. The $30 million Google Lunar X Prize, all you have to do is land the robot on the moon, row 500 meters, send back photos and videos. And our first prize in the energy environment space is the Progressive Automotive X Prize for a new generation of cars that exceed 100 miles per gallon. So our focus going forward is in many areas, but primarily now in energy and environment. I feel it's a moral obligation for us to launch some incredible and powerful energy X Prizes. Prizes for alternative energy generation, for next generation renewable microrefineries, for energy storage, for conservative energy usage. And people ask, how do we come up with the XPRIZE concepts? Well, there are 3 primary ways. First, we go out to the global thought leaders, the mavericks, the people who have the same passion for this that I had for opening the space frontier. Second, we get interest from the general public. The notion is that someone out there has a crystal clear, powerful idea that can become an XPRIZE. And third, with our partnership with MIT, the XPRIZE Lab at MIT. So I'm extraordinarily proud that we have some graduate, undergraduate students thinking about where we should be doing XPRIZes in energy and the environment. And in particular, that a good friend of mine, Dr. Erica Wagner, who runs this, has brought her heart and soul and tremendous leadership to this lab. Erica, would you come and talk to us about it? Our newly minted PhD.
So it's my honor and my pleasure to come to work every day and to tackle what we see as the grand challenges of the world, and to bring undergraduate and graduate students together through the XPRIZE Lab to talk about how we can bring to bear the power of the XPRIZE model in meeting these challenges. Last semester, we took on the issue of global health, looking at revolutionizing developing world healthcare. We had a great group of students that looked into this and designing new prizes, and I'm really proud to say that we had one team that proposed a new prize that we're going to take forward with the XPRIZE Foundation and hopefully be ready to launch a new XPRIZE in about a year's time. I'd like to recognize Judy Morrow. Judy, if you could please stand. Judy was the team leader for a group of graduate and undergraduate students that designed a prize in tuberculosis diagnostics. That prize has since been backed by a $500,000 grant that the XPRIZE Foundation is using to take this forward and to raise a prize person to develop a prize so that we can actually revolutionize the way that we diagnose tuberculosis, the way that we bring healthcare to the developing world. This semester, we're turning our attention away from developing world healthcare and onto the topic of sustainable energy technologies. We have a number of students, just wave guys, here in the audience. We have students coming to us from across the Institute, engineers, scientists, visual arts, Sloan School of Management, trying to figure out how indeed do we take these XPRIZes and make them change the world. So thank you very much. Peter, I'm going to throw this back to you. We look forward to coming back, having you back here in a year's time, and having a new prize to announce.
Thank you, Erica. So it's not many classes here at MIT that your ideas can actually get translated into a $10 million prize that drives hundreds of million dollars of breakthrough. I've asked Erica to actually look at expanding the size of her class and bringing in another 5 or 6 students to really try and do this. And so if you're interested in that, please do email and join the class. It's an amazing opportunity. I think the email would be xprize@mit.org. So today's session is a lot of fun. The second way that we generate prize ideas after the MIT, XPRIZE lab at MIT is thought leaders. And today we have assembled 3 amazing world-class thought leaders to share with you their ideas. And I've asked them each to address the question, what would they advise the next president? So here with us today are Dr. Ray Kurzweil, Dr. George Church, and Dr. Saul Griffith. Our first speaker is a good friend of mine, Dr. Ray Kurzweil, a member of the MIT Corporation, the author of numerous books, including Singularity's Near and Fantastic Voyage, and the recipient of numerous PhDs, recognized by the president and along with another board member, Larry Page, co-founder of Google. Ray serves on the National Academy of Energy and is really focused on the grand challenges of energy, and in particular in solar. And we've asked him to come and speak to that. Ray, if you'd please join us.
Well, as Peter alluded, the timing is good. We just got finished with a panel on the National Academy of Engineering called Grand Challenges in Engineering, where we dealt with different major challenges of society and how we could address them through engineering. And Larry Page and I took on the energy challenge. And we came up with a plan to transform our energy resources from fossil fuels to solar. There are other technologies we'll hear about that can also contribute, but we were excited about solar because it really has the capacity to meet our energy needs in an environmentally friendly way and at very low cost. And there is an exponential progression going on already in solar, and ultimately it will become an information technology, and one of my main themes is that information technologies inherently grow at an exponential rate. But one key observation is that we have 10,000 times more sunlight than we need. In other words, if we captured 1 part in 10,000 of the sunlight that falls on the Earth, we could meet 100%, which is 10 to the 13th watts, of the energy that we consume worldwide. And we can't do that today because solar panels are still an old industrial technology. They're heavy, they're inefficient, they're costly, they're hard to integrate with building materials. There's already a new generation of solar panels that have some influence of nanotechnology from companies like NanoSolar, which are more efficient, lighter weight. There are other ideas like thermal solar, where you use parabolic mirrors to concentrate a very large quantity of sunlight onto a small surface and then use conventional methods of converting that heat into energy. There's actually a variety of innovative ideas emerging, but there's already an exponential progression in solar energy. It's been doubling every 2 years for quite a few years now. We're about 9 doublings away from it meeting 100% of our energy needs. And so one important point I want to make is that it's easy to dismiss technologies when they're only meeting 1% or even less of the need. And it's important to take into consideration the exponential. So I'm going to show you quickly some examples of just how pervasive exponential growth is, particularly as technologies become an information technology. Now, not all technology is an information technology. Health and medicine, for example, is transforming right now into an information technology, but it wasn't an information technology just a few years ago. So it was progressing linearly. But with the advent of the genome, the ability to reprogram the genome, RNA interference to turn genes off, new forms of gene therapy to add new genes, the ability to simulate biological processes on computers, to design interventions such as drugs on computers. Health and medicine has become an information technology. So it's going to be subject to what I call the law of accelerating returns, which is an exponential progression with a doubling time, turns out about 1 year. And that's quite a startling phenomenon. And the Genome Project's a good example, which George was a major contributor to. When that was announced in 1990, as you'll remember, it was really dismissed by mainstream critics as it's kind of a renegade project that was not likely to succeed because worldwide we'd used our best PhD students and most advanced equipment, and we managed to sequence 1/10,000th of the genome. And then halfway through the 15-year project, mainstream skeptics said, I told you this wasn't going to work. I mean, here you are halfway through the project and you finished 1% of the project. But that was right on schedule because they had been doubling little numbers. And if you double 1% 7 more times, which is what you guys managed to do, you get to 100%, and the project was, in fact, finished on time. But it's easy to dismiss when it's a small phenomenon. I wrote about an emerging World Wide Web, not by that name, emerging in the mid-1990s because I saw the ARPANET doubling every year. But that was easy to dismiss when the entire DARPA budget could only tie together a few thousand scientists. So let me show you a few examples of this. It goes way beyond Moore's law or even way beyond electronics, and then I'll apply it to solar energy. This exponential progression does accelerate the adoption of technologies. Things like the telephone took 50 years to be adopted by a mass audience. The web, search engines, social networks, these have been adopted in just a few years' time. There's a big difference between a linear progression and an exponential progression. If I take 30 steps linearly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I get to 30. If I take 30 exponential steps, 2, 4, 8, 16, I get to 1 billion. It makes a huge difference. And in fact, if I compare computers today to when I was a student here at MIT, they are 1 billion times more effective for the same cost. We all shared one computer when I was a student here. It took up half a building. The computer in your cell phone today is 1 million times smaller, 1 million times cheaper, and 1,000 times more powerful. That's a billion-fold increase in price performance, or 100,000 times smaller. We'll make that same comparison, 100,000-fold size reduction and billion-fold increase in price performance again in the next 25 years. And computation, I mean, these are logarithmic graphs, so a straight line is exponential growth. This represents a trillions-fold increase in price performance. But, I mean, look at this. This looks like it's the output of some tabletop experiment, but this is smooth and very predictable exponential growth going back to the 1890 census, long before Gordon Moore was even born, through 5 different paradigms. Moore's law was the 5th, not the first paradigm to bring exponential growth to computing. And that's a double exponential because the rate has been increasing. Supercomputers marching along, cost of a transistor. I mean, look at how smooth and predictable a phenomena this is. And the 50% deflation rate has actually led to concerns this would lead to contraction of the economy as information technology becomes dominant, but we actually more than double our consumption of these technologies each year as new applications become feasible, like solar energy. Magnetic data storage, I just put that up because it's not Moore's law. This is different engineers, different engineering problem, packing bits on a magnetic substrate, but it's the same exponential progression. And DNA sequencing costs from $10 per base pair in 1990 to a small fraction of a penny today. George just told me about a new technology which is 10,000 times more effective than the ones we used 3 years ago. So I'd like you to stay on the exponential, not go above it. But this slope represents a smooth doubling every year of genetic data sequenced. And this has continued since the collection of the first genome in 2003. Telecommunications, there's many different ways to measure this. I don't want to dwell on these. Also, decrease in size in mechanical devices. This is relevant to solar energy because it's nanotechnology ultimately that's going to enable solar energy to be an information technology. And let me come to, that brings me to solar energy. This has been progressing. It's been progressing linear in terms of cost effectiveness. It's been progressing exponentially in terms of adoption rates. It's already cost effective in certain special circumstances. Larry Page and I concluded that we're less than 5 years away from a tipping point where the cost of solar energy will be competitive per watt with fossil fuels. And there's many innovative ideas feeding into this, including ideas in energy storage to deal with the intermittency of solar. The doubling time for watts from solar worldwide is less than 2 years, and we're less than 10 doublings away. Our report called for a conversion to solar energy as well as other renewable forms of energy within 20 years. At that point, the cost of solar will be a small fraction of the cost of oil and coal. So this is the actual progression. This is on a linear scale. This is on a log scale. So a straight line is exponential growth. It's been growing exponentially, actually, for a couple of decades now. This is cumulative growth since all of the production we have of solar panels, those solar panels are installed, and we're really interested in the number of watts we're generating from solar energy. So this is growing exponentially, and it's 9 or 10 doublings away from meeting 100% of our energy needs. And comparison of different countries, Germany and China are actually in the lead. And the cost per watt, this is actually not a good way to look at it, because even if this went down to 0, it wouldn't look like the chart is doing much. So if we look at watts per unit of currency, we see linear growth at this time. One of our beliefs, and we spent a lot of time studying this, is that this is going to become an information technology. And just like biology went from a hit-or-miss affair, which was making linear progress, to an exponential progression as it becomes an information technology, we believe the same thing will happen here as solar panels become more and more subject to nanotechnology. The term nanotechnology today is very often applied to materials where they have new properties based on their molecular characteristics. But the true promise of nanotechnology is to be able to create intricate materials and devices by building them up through molecular fragments, through massively parallel information processes, computer-controlled processes. And we will get there within 20 years. There are a number of labs here, such as Neil Gershenfeld's lab at the Center for Bits and Atoms, which is affiliated with the Media Lab, which are working on this. Ultimately, solar panels will be true nanotechnology, which will be an information technology. We believe that this curve will become exponential. But even with the linear progress in cost, we've been making exponential progress in cumulative energy from solar. So we believe that this will continue. We see the same type of progressions in wind. Wind is actually ahead of solar. There isn't as much wind out there as solar, but there's actually plenty to meet all of our energy needs just from wind. There's 10,000 times more than we need in solar. New forms of fuels, which George will talk about, are also going to be a major factor. And it's already viable in many areas. I mean, this is just one picture of a solar park, a solar farm in Germany. These large installations are popping up all around the world. There's already one all-solar city being planned for 50,000 people, which is actually in the Middle East. And so many other areas, particularly outside the United States, such as Germany, Japan, and also in the Arab countries, are making major progress in this. But it's also a major area of investment here. Al Gore now works for Kleiner Perkins, and the confidence he gained from looking at the new emerging technologies that they're investing in led him to predict 10 years, or at least set 10 years as a goal to really convert the bulk of our energy needs to these emerging renewable forms of energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Our next speaker is Dr. George Church. George is a professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School, director of the Center for Computational Genetics. He also received his PhD from that place down the road, co-founder of LS9, and a competitor for the $10 million Archon XPRIZE for genomics. George, would you please come and join us?
So thanks to everyone here, and especially to Ray for setting up some of the key questions. How do we turn solar energy into an exponential? How do we get it to be maybe leverage biology, which has recently turned into an exponential? And I'll talk about that. I have many organizations to thank. I want to especially point out the Department of Energy, which has funded my lab from the very first day, 21 years ago in '87. And what you'll see is some of the outcome of that wonderful Department of Energy funding. Now, right at the moment, what we have is about 15 times 10 to the 12th watts being used by the human race. And you can see biomass is a fairly small fraction of that, but that doesn't actually include the agricultural uses in a purely food sense, which is quite a bit larger than biomass being used as an energy source. So that's an underestimate. And I think we're going to need all of these methods in the near future until we are entirely solar, as Ray says, at least for a while. But these ratios are going to change dramatically, and they're going to change whichever one is on the exponential is going to be the one that blows up out of this chart. As Ray said, we have 10,000 times the amount of light we need actually hitting the land and the ocean surfaces. A lot of it's bounced off of clouds and so forth. Some of it turns into wind, which hopefully Saul will tell us about. But the real question is, what does this turn into? It turns into photosynthesis at a pretty good clip, in the sense that about of the 2 trillion tons of carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere, about 15% of it is removed by photosynthesis every year. And you say, well, just 7 years and we don't have any carbon dioxide left, we don't have any global warming problem. But obviously all of it's returned back to the atmosphere at the same rate, plus we're adding another 1% from our human activities. And so many of the solutions to energy problems are not necessarily solutions to the carbon dioxide problem, as long as we keep loading the atmosphere with carbon dioxide. And some people think we already have too much up there, so we need to sequester it. Now, sequestration is something that's very difficult to motivate people to do. It's like if we make biofuels, say, and then we start pumping them into empty oil fields, it's hard to get people excited about that. But if we build things, non-biodegradable cities and roads, that's another thing. Anyway, energy efficiency is sometimes, when we talk about, I'm not trying to set up too much of an apples and oranges situation here, but when we talk about photovoltaics, we often bring out our best laboratory result, 42.7% efficiency. But this is peak efficiency under ideal laboratory conditions. And then we'll compare it to photosynthesis, which often is very, very inefficient, less than 0.1% in the wild, because frankly it didn't evolve to be that efficient. But you can get it up to 11%. But that's actually not a fair comparison, because you're actually, when you talk about efficiency, you're actually producing something like oils or biomass, which have, and you're making it at all year round. You're doing the conversion winter, night, and you're taking all the biomass you make over that year and doing the calculation. The other thing is, when you're talking about photovoltaics, or for that matter, any other source of electricity, if it's dependent on wind or light, then there's going to be downtime, and you need to store it. And the storage, a really great storage device actually, is biological. So for example, biodiesel has a storage capacity about 70 times higher than some of the best batteries that are in routine use. So you kind of get the idea of why we're motivated to do biofuels. So what are we doing about it? I've been happy to have some great colleagues that we founded this company called LS9 in California, and another one here in Massachusetts is starting up, where we're leveraging what biological systems do, which is they make oils, they make fats, and some of them make 80% of their biomass as oils. But you can engineer this to even higher levels, and you can either base it on fatty acids or isoprenes. And the idea here is not to make some radical new source of energy, which requires restructuring of all the cars, trucks, and jets, but to make something that's compatible with current engines, at least as a transition step. And so that means basically making gasoline and diesel and jet fuel. There's another advantage, so we're not making hydrogen or ethanol or electricity, which requires huge trillion-dollar infrastructure change. Another advantage of working with these products that are more like petroleum is that they don't need to be distilled when you make them in a biological system, which usually has water in it. They basically float to the top as hydrocarbons, and they don't take any nitrogen or phosphorus or sulfur, which would be in fertilizer in a normal agricultural system. And so you can just skim these off at a fairly low cost. And you can see these. You shouldn't be entirely fooled by these exponential-looking curves in production because what these really mean is that these were producing 0 molecules when we started, and so you can get basically infinite improvement in yield. What matters is that you get to break-even point from a commercial production standpoint. From that standpoint, there's a projection of 2 million liters that this company is going to be making in 2009, and we'll see whether that actually works out. One interesting advantage that biological engineering has that isn't really common in other forms of engineering, aside from the transition to digital and exponential that Ray mentioned, is that we can do evolution as well as design. So instead of making, putting all of our energies into a single device, single car, a laptop, cell phone, and then doing market analysis and debugging and so forth, we can make a billion or a trillion different constructs if we're not quite sure, maybe a little more uncertain, but able to make a lot more different ones, and then we can select for them under ideal circumstances. And these are various colleagues that have done this, including making resistance to the fuels that the cells are making, and devising ways to encourage high-value precursors for chemical processes. And a famous example that DuPont has brought about for making 3GT, which is used in carpeting, it's going to be one of the major carpeting polymers. It uses 1,3-propane-diol, and they managed to get up to 90% of the theoretical yield based on metabolic pathways in this process, which is now at a 2.4 million liter scale. And you probably also know that there's a lot of engineering that's now used in farms, maybe not in Europe, but most other farms that have built into the plants by genetic engineering resistance to herbicides and to resistance to insects and ability to make improved products like golden rice, which makes a precursor to vitamin A. And finally, that business about resistance to herbicides and to insects is one of the reasons that the genetically engineered organisms, you can achieve both safety and productivity, not as a trade-off, but actually in the same direction. If you make something that is less likely to interact with the environment, it's less likely to exchange DNA with the environment, which is one of the things that the critics of genetically modified organisms or genetically engineered organisms have said. And one of the things we're trying to do, or well along, is changing the genetic code. For those of you that are biologists will recognize these are the 64 codons that determine how DNA is translated into proteins. And we are actually well along in changing one of the codons so it now has a new code which will make it resistant to all viruses that might infect this cell in the wild. And I just wanted to end on tribute to what Ray was reminding us what Ray was saying, and my personal voyage in this is not, it's a logarithmic plot, so it's actually going changing its slope, as he mentioned. And I've been a parasite on the computational exponential, and I've been a very active and close participant in the synthetic chemistry and analytic chemistry that mostly in DNA. Period, full stop.
Thank you, George. Just a reminder, we're going to have a Q&A session with all three of the speakers. Our final speaker is Dr. Saul Griffith. Saul has multiple degrees in material science, mechanical engineering, and completed his PhD in programmable assembly and self-replicating machines here at MIT. Co-founder and a serial entrepreneur of numerous companies, is now the CEO of Makani Power, and is also a great advocate of education through his how-tunes. Winner of numerous awards, please welcome Saul Griffith.
Thank you, everyone. I should be careful what I say. I've seen at least 3 of my summer interns in the audience, so they will no doubt correct me when I make a mistake. There's only one exponential curve in my life. I have a startup in high-altitude wind energy. We were producing electricity at $1 million a kilowatt hour last year. We were about $500,000 a kilowatt hour in January, and we're down to about $1,000 a kilowatt now. So, I don't know, a penny a kilowatt by end of next year. So I took very seriously Peter's request to do the what would you advise the next president as regards energy, in particular around renewables. And so I'm going to end the evening with a little bit of a reality check of what's going on and what's possible. So assuming that I'm going to be talking to someone who believes in evolution and climate change, I would first want to say something like this. This is a representative citizen of your country. In fact, this is an anally retentive mathematician who calculated every watt of power consumed in his life, namely me. I flew too much last year. That was a huge amount of power. I can tell you how much my eating cost, how much very little in electricity for my house, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I used about 18 kilowatts of power all year to run my life last year. Does this work? Yeah, okay. I would then remind him that actually the previous government spent an enormous amount of energy on my behalf. In fact, 300 watts of my 18,000 watts is in embodied energy of the road infrastructure in the US. They won't publish the data for the US military hardware, the embodied energy in that, nor the nuclear arsenal. If I had that data, I suspect I'm actually using another couple of kilowatts. So I'd remind him about that, because we'll come back to that later. So I used 18 kilowatts. What do all of you model American citizens in the audience use? You use about 11 kilowatts. That's this red line here. You're not the worst in the world. Qatar and Iceland and the United Arab Emirates are worse, but you're damn near the worst. This green line here is the global average per capita power consumption per person, about 2,255 watts last year. So how has the per capita power consumption of Americans risen? I was really hoping that I would be able to say that my great-grandfather used 2,000 watts, and so that he lived a good life, and maybe I can reduce my power consumption to 2,000 watts, it'll be okay. That's untrue. Ever since the Mayflower landed, Americans have been using about 3,500 watts. That will become problematic shortly. This is an unfortunate exponential. This is the power consumption of the US since 1750, recorded data by the Department of Energy, broken down by category, and you can see it's coal, natural gas, and petroleum that make up the lion's share of that. That's the same graph for the last 100 years. So after reminding him about America using 3.5 terawatts, I might just quickly say, and the world uses 15 terawatts, as the 2 previous speakers have laid out. Again, majority is in these fossil fuels, quite a lot in biomass, and bugger all in the, to use an Australian phrase, in the renewables. This is an interesting graph. This is all the countries of the world. Doesn't really show very well. That American flag on the bottom, that is your power consumption. All right, the scary one, if I can hold it there, that's Russia. This orange one is China. That's India. That's Japan. All of those are increasing pretty quickly. America's increasing a lot. That's 15 terawatts. So we do a bit of a history lesson. This is the breakdown for the world over time. The nice point here, we'll come back to this, is we used to use 5 terawatts in 1965, 15 terawatts today. So we've bought online 10 terawatts in the last 40 years. That could be a nice point. This is how it breaks down by how we use it in the world. Not much in light, a ton in electricity, a ton in transportation. I won't belabor that. Then after bringing him up to speed on what the average citizen uses, what the whole country uses, what the whole world uses, I'd remind him about all of those press clippings he had seen about this thing called climate change. So this is the last 1,000 years of CO2 concentration with a very steep, unfortunate, I'll continue to use the phrase exponential at this end. This is, if you want to go back 400,000 years, the data never really went above 300 until we came along and started burning stuff. And then I can say this because I'm not an American citizen yet, I would very pointedly point at this graph and say, this is your national security problem for the next 50 years. This is cumulative CO2 emissions from fossil fuel burning from 1750 to now. And so this big blue one here is America. So you have cumulatively contributed more than 25% of all of the world's CO2, and second place getter is very, very distant. So when things actually start to go wrong with climate, the rest of the world can rightly point a very long finger right there. So that means that's an opportunity for you to lead the world in making the right changes. And if you're going to make those changes, you probably want to know what you're shooting for. So what is the target atmospheric CO2? That's a very important thing. You probably look at all the disaster scenarios. You decide how many coral reefs you want to have, if you want to have them at all, how many environmental refugees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or you can just do the shortcut Jim Hansen at NASA did and say, you know, while civilization developed, we never saw more than 350. That's for a very good reason. That should be the target. That's below where we are today at 385. If you said the target was 450, that would mean, well, we'll find out what that means in a second. All right, so you've got to reduce carbon enormously. In fact, to get to a target of 450, which would mean a 2-degree temperature rise in the optimistic scenario, you can only burn 2 to 3 terawatts worth of power from fossil fuels. So of the 15 terawatts that humanity makes, you now need to make 12 of that with some new source and turn off 12 terawatts of the old sources. So what do you got to play with in renewables land? This paints the picture beyond solar and wind to all of it. So there's 85,000 terawatts of solar incident at the surface of the Earth. There's 3,600 terawatts of wind at all altitudes. In third place is hydroelectricity generated from clouds, but no one knows how to do that yet. Hopefully they're in this room. If you wait until the water hits the land, there's only 7 terawatts of hydro potential in all rivers in the world. That's only half of humanity. Unfortunately, coastal wave power, if you flattened every surf break in the world and made me a very unhappy surfer, you only get one-fifth of humanity's power supply. All the tidal power in the world is, again, 1/5. All photosynthetic activity on land, if you burnt all of it, is about 65 terawatts. There might be a little more, according to George, and I'm prepared to believe that, and I hope there is. But this is basically the playbook you get for thinking about the goals and the targets for renewable energy. And I think it's why you can conclude that in the limit case, solar is a very good idea. So there's a problem not just about efficiency, but I think when you really start to think about this problem, if you solve for CO2, you translate out our woes into a land area problem. This is where you might get innovative. So 1,270 watts hits the outer atmosphere. We lose some going through the atmosphere. We lose some day and night. We lose some in cloud and weather, some with geography. Terrestrial solar flux is about 90 to 300 watts per square meter, depending on where you are in the world. Technology efficiency. So you've got a super single crystalline solar cell, you'll get 40. You've got an average thin film, you might get 10. If you've got solar thermal, you might get 35, 36, maybe up to 40%. So that's the efficiency of conversion. But that's not the land area use. You'll really only effectively space photovoltaics, about 50% of your land coverage and about 25% for solar thermal. Unfortunately, that means you're only going to get 10 to 20 watts per square meter net of land area from solar. I think ambitiously you might double that number, but you won't get a factor of 10. So this is what I see as sort of a hard limit, and we'll see why it's important in a second. Now, wind, unfortunately, as wind is today, it's even worse. So a 100-meter diameter wind turbine, this guy is rated 3 megawatts, goes through a 33% capacity factor. You'll get about a megawatt from that. You space them on a 10 by 10 grid, so 10 diameters. So in effect, you get 1 megawatt per square kilometre, which is 1 watt per square metre. That's actually not very good. You might double that, but you're not going to get a factor of 10. My company goes up, so you break it from a 2D to a 3D problem. That will be a win, but still perhaps not enough. Hydroelectric, if you actually take the land area covered by the catchment of Lake Mead for the Hoover Dam, you only get 3 watts per square metre out of hydro. Unfortunately, George, I think if you have a 3% efficient algae, you get about the same, 2 to 3 watts per square metre. That means if you want a terawatt of biofuels, you need all of Wyoming. All right, so here's the most confusing graph I could draw. Okay, so these are the flags of countries. The rectangle is the surface area of the land mass of that country. So here are the top 6 biggest by land area in the world: Russia, China, Canada, USA, 4th place, Brazil, and yay team, Australia. On the top here, they may look a little insignificant. So this is 2 terawatts of wind if you get 2 watts per square metre, 5 terawatts of solar, and I'm giving you 20 watts per square metre, terawatt of hydro at 3, and 2 terawatts of biofuels. I think I actually gave it 4 watts per square metre to be generous. If you actually put that on its side, it's as big as Brazil or Australia. So the point here is to get 10 terawatts, that's half of what we predict humanity will use by 2020. The installations are continent-sized, and it's very difficult right now to see an order of magnitude improvement in that, maybe a factor of 2. So there's a huge challenge here in changing that equation or figuring out some way around it. So what does that mean for me as an individual? This orange square is the land area of the USA. This is land area per person globally. This yellow area is my 18 terawatts if I produced it with really, really, really good solar cells. That's a pretty significant portion of my area. If I put agriculture here, roads, etc., you run out of room for polar bears. So we also need to start thinking about this. I'm not sure this is in the dialogue yet, but it is undoubtedly going to be important. There are countries in the world that do not have the land area to provide all of their citizens their power requirement. So that sort of is a troubling, unfortunately, piece of reality for this stuff. So what is the point? Another point I really want to make to the president is we hear these terms politically feasible, right? We describe this energy problem in terms of the political feasibility of solving it, and that's why clean coal and these things get a run-in. So we have to change that politically feasible discussion and the economically feasible discussion to what is technically necessary. And so the technical minds, the great technical minds of my generation are hopefully in this room, so we have to change the dialogue, right? Technically necessary in terms of climate change means these things, means these compromises. All right, so it's not impossible. Let's say you've got 25 years to get 12 terawatts online. You'll do 3 nuclear, 2 geothermal, 2 wind, 2 solar thermal, 2 photovoltaic, and half a terawatt of biofuels just for kicks. This is what the next 25 years looks like. So don't be scared. 100 square meters of solar cells every second for the next 25 years. Installed somewhere in the world. That's this auditorium every second for the next 25 years. 2 terawatts. For a solar thermal, it'll be 50 square meters of mirrors every second. Wind turbines, good news is you only have to make 1 100-meter diameter wind turbine every 5 minutes. That's about 10 times the size of this room. 1 3-gigawatt nuclear plant every week for the next 25 years. 300 megawatt steam turbines. That's a steam turbine the size of this room. It's a very convenient room. Every day for the next 25 years. And then an Olympic swimming pool of genetically engineered algae every second for the next 25 years. Then you're going to say that's an awful lot of cement. There's a lot of embodied energy in cement. We won't use swimming pools, so let's use Wyoming. Right. So I guess the point is here, I am an incredible optimist, but I don't want to bet the future on hope. I think we have to bet it on really good thermodynamics, really brutal analysis of actual numbers and real data. We have to be actually understand that if we do this complete flip to renewables, that I hope we do, there's a big, big compromise. You know, it would be, I think, 6% of the land area of the US to do their current 3.5 terawatts with renewables. So that's 3 times the area of all car parks, roads, and buildings. So imagine that much infrastructure. So it sort of means that you need to also think, if we're talking very loosely about energy prices, how do you stop people using more? How do you, efficiency, I don't like as a term, but basically it shouldn't be efficiency, it should be abstinence, right? But very really, I hope desperately the fusion comes through. I hope we get 80% efficient solar cells at the third thermodynamic limit. I hope we do 10% efficient biofuels, because then we only need half of Wyoming. I hope we do high altitude wind. I hope everyone in the room does at least one of all those things. But this would also lead you to conclude you can't write off, if you're sane, carbon sequestration at massive scale, nuclear at massive scale. And this is basically the playbook. I'm at MIT, I threw a lot of numbers at you, you should be used to it. Let's play this out by the numbers and not bet the future on hope, but bet it on the brain trust right here. Thanks.
That's great. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you guys, all 3 of you, to please come and stand up here with me. And we're going to do a period of question and answer. And then after that, we're going to be announcing an important competition open to all of you. So, I'm going to ask the first question. Ray, what do you think of Saul's numbers?
Well, we went through these numbers. I would take issue with some of them, but you mentioned Wyoming. It's actually a good choice because there are a lot of deserts in Wyoming. About 20% of the land mass in the United States is desert. Some other countries, the figure is even higher. A small fraction of the desert lands devoted to solar and wind and some other renewables would meet all of our energy needs. There's a lot of money. Once you reach a tipping point where this is economically viable, we spend $2 trillion a year, not on R&D, but just on consumption of energy. That can fuel a lot of these installations. So the key, I agree, is the engineering to move these curves to where we have a tipping point, where it really is an financial incentive to put that $2 trillion into these kinds of installations. But we went through it, and solar will be economical once we reach that tipping point, which we believe is only about 5 years away. And there are a lot of reasons I would point out beyond just carbon dioxide and carbon in the atmosphere to do this. You can list 100 different toxins that result from the use of fossil fuels at every stage: extraction, shipment, and utilization. So there are a lot of incentives to move in this direction.
Let me open up for some questions here. We have some mics. Surely there. Yes, please, up there.
I want to throw in one keyword here, which is energy return on energy invested. And my question would be, with all of these numbers that you presented.
I have the answer, I think. So the question is, for any energy thing, to extract the oil from the ground that we use, we put in about 10% of the energy that you'll get out of that oil just to get it out of the ground. So that is true for solar, that is true for wind, that is true for everything. The best offshore wind turbine has an energy return period of about 4 months. Best onshore is about 8 to 9 months. I think if you take all the best technologies today and give them a 50% improvement on the embodied energy cost, which I don't think is going to change a huge amount except for maybe thin film solar, you will be using somewhere, the low side would be 1.5 terawatts, the high side would be 4 terawatts of power just to renew that energy infrastructure every 30 years. So I think it's an unbelievably important thing, and I would encourage Peter to consider that embodied energy component of the renewable energy very seriously in the XPRIZE. And there's the point that actually got me there. I went through the question, all right, so if you wanted to very much stay below 425 ppm CO2, how much more carbon can you produce? If you made 100% of the renewable infrastructure change using fossil fuels, where would we get from 385? And basically, it sort of says you get one shot at the infrastructure change, meaning the burnt energy to get you to that 10 terawatts installed. If that was done with fossil fuels, obviously, it'll be crossing curves, but it would take you dangerously close. So I think there's a very important point there, which is you need to choose pretty wisely, pretty quickly, and not have rolling infrastructure changes.
In terms of infrastructure, I think it's important to move towards decentralized infrastructures so that you're not dependent on one centralized grid for which the technology is inevitably going to become obsolete. And in order to do that, you need new storage technologies, and that's also an important area of innovation. Nanotechnology, for example, MEMS technology is being applied to fuel cells. There are a lot of emerging technologies that can solve that problem. And if we can do it in a decentralized manner, then you can phase in innovations without investing in another obsolete infrastructure.
Question up there.
Hi, so Dr. Kurzweil actually already started answering my question, but I was going to note that while I understand the genius of turning Wyoming into a massive energy park and also of doing something in the deserts of the southwestern United States, we also have a pretty big problem, which is that our electricity grid is decaying, and it's pretty problematic to actually get power to the places where we need it. So I'm wondering if you guys have ideas on that about decentralizing our electricity generation or about how we might fix the grid.
I mean, even at the formative stage we're at now, we're running into limits, particularly with wind, which is ahead of solar, on the ability of the grid to handle that. So I think the answer is really to move away from a massive new national grid, but to decentralized solutions that will require new energy storage solutions. There are new technologies, some of which look quite scalable, particularly when we can get nanotechnology to produce sort of micro-size fuel cells. I'm involved with one company that's doing that with MEMS technology. They have a very inexpensive, using actually very low-resolution MEMS technology that can create thousands of fuel cells on a chip. And it looks like it could be scaled up from powering your cell phone up to powering houses and even villages. But there's a lot of new ideas in this area as well.
I think I heard your question differently. I think you said, Peter, why isn't it a $1 trillion prize for the first continent to have a high voltage DC grid?
George, I asked you a question once. How quickly do you think bioengineered fuels could replace imported fuel here in the United States? Could you?
Well, combining that with some of the things that we've just been talking about, biological sources is a very compact way of storing energy. It's very local. It doesn't require a grid. If you have hydrocarbons, hydrogen, or other biological products, they're very storable, and they can be produced locally and used locally. How fast we're getting genetic engineering? Well, I gave some examples. We already have genetic engineering in the agricultural sector.
But if the next president in his wisdom said, we want to get off and want to use biofuels,
right,
what would be the timeline? What timeline could that look like?
But, I mean, you can start deploying it the instant that you have the will to do it. Corn is inefficient. Corn to ethanol was a bad idea. It was a rushed idea. But if you do something that doesn't take much longer to implement, mixed grasses that are perennial and don't require plowing and fertilization are automatically a factor of 4 better. And they use marginal lands. They don't compete with food. And then algae is another factor of 5 better than that, which shows, at least in principle, you can have you might have a variety of crops And to the statement that Saul has made a couple of times, I mean, framing it in terms of losing a state makes it sound horrible. No, it's okay. But if you frame it in terms of how much land is already dedicated to agriculture and the marginal lands, which is used for grazing, and even more marginal lands, this is not a big deal. 6% of the
good
United
news
States.
is we can co-locate wind farms with biofuels.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a great idea
Yeah.
to make fuels that are compatible with existing engines. I mean, we still type on QWERTY keyboards,
Yeah.
which were specifically designed to be inefficient so you wouldn't jam the typewriter keys.
Yeah.
There's a lot of momentum in existing infrastructure, and there's a hell of a lot of engines that are designed to work with gasolines.
Next question. Okay, we got a question in the back and then a question over here. So let's get the mics over there. Can you hand the mic back, please, Angela? The back row over here.
Yesterday, Thomas Kasten of Recycled Energy spoke at MIT, and he points out a particular problem which you just raised, Dr. Kurzweil, the built-in inefficiencies. One of his charts showed that we've basically not increased efficiency in electrical generation since 1960. We're still at 33%, and his business is doing combined heat and power and high efficiency, and he gets up to 85% in combined heat and power. So the problem is not technological innovation. The problem is human innovation and human take-up. So let me give you an example. I do small-scale solar. There are about 1 million solar dynamo radios, AM/FM shortwave radios, that NATO and US forces have distributed in Afghanistan. All of these solar dynamos can charge only the internal hardwired battery. They can be very easily modified to charge AA or D batteries so that people can have a cell phone, a tape player, a walkie-talkie, some other mechanism, and actually an LED light so they can read it at night. USAID is now going to embark on a program in Sudan to distribute AM/FM shortwave solar dynamo radios made by FreePlay. Again, only charges the dedicated battery. FreePlay even makes a solar dynamo light radio, which has a cell phone charger. So the problem is not the technology, but the imagination that we apply to the technology and the inefficiencies that we build into the systems.
Well, the kinds of technologies you're talking about, I think, will have a lot of significance for developing countries, perhaps not in meeting this 10 to the 13th watts that we need, or at least not as much. But there are a number of technologies like that. Dean Kamen has a Stirling engine which can convert any fuel, including cow dung, which in fact is a major fuel for it, into energy. And he has installations in third world countries that also then fuels his water machine that can convert any kind of dirty water into totally pure water, and has created a whole micro-capitalist system of people providing the cow dung to run the machine and bringing in the dirty water and then selling the clean water. We actually figured out for only a few $1 billion we could meet the entire water needs of Africa and at the same time produce enough energy to run radios and computers and light bulbs and so on. So there are a lot of ideas like this that I think that can help the developing world. They don't make a huge contribution towards that 10 to the 13th watts, which we're also trying to address.
Just two quick anecdotes on that. So the return energy time for a good solar cell is 3 years. For average, it's about 6 or 7. Unless that thing is pointed at the sun for its entire lifetime, you're not going to get the power back. So I would be concerned with a lot of these solar dynamos that aren't in absolutely well located, that it's just a waste of solar. It's a waste of energy because it's going to be net negative in its lifetime. This is also true, fantastic study just done by Great Britain on small local wind turbines where the hub height for the wind turbine is below 10 meters. Virtually none of them get the energy of the infrastructure back in their lifetime. So I think we have to get used to talking about things very Britishly in terms of the embodied energy and whether or not this makes sense over the 10 to 20 year time frame of these devices, or we just dig the hole deeper. Unfortunately, I think those devices right now might be digging it deeper.
Okay, a question on the left and a question on the right here. Yep.
Hi, I have recently listened to a few military personnel talk about the feasibility and uses of space solar power, but I noticed that you guys hadn't mentioned it at all in this presentation. I wanted to get some of your opinions about the feasibility and the efficiency of it, if you guys know anything about it.
Well, we looked at that at the National Academy of Engineering, and it would require some breakthroughs in transmission of energy from space, which we deemed to be speculative, and there are large engineering projects that may or may not get the investment. It's theoretically feasible, but there is a whole ferment of innovation going on with solar panels, thermosolar storage mechanisms that are on a progression and have been improving for many years. So we weren't really sure whether the singular breakthrough needed for this space transmission would occur or not.
If I may, my colleagues in space would kill me for not feverishly supporting solar power satellites, but the best analogy I have is, you remember the days of Iridium and Globalstar that invested billions of dollars to low Earth or neo Earth global cell phone systems, at the same time that the cost of micro cell phone deployment fell through the roof, and of course the business case for them fell apart at that point. And I think that literally the tens to hundreds of billions of dollars that would have to go into building out solar power satellites would end up better be used driving innovations on the Earth.
I wouldn't rule it out, but it's not something you can count on.
We have last two questions here. The folks with the microphone.
I saw a URL for one of the presentations go by. It's too fast to make a note of it. If there are URLs for each of the presentations, if you could at some point write them on the blackboard or something. And secondly, I was really struck by something Saul said about sort of the one shot at getting the infrastructure right, and that raises for me something that Amory Lovins has talked about often, and there's somebody named Michael Clare who writes about the politics of energy and resources, which is right now all of the money being spent on wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Clare anyway says, it's sort of like one shot, either spend it on the wars or spend it on this. And so I would be interested in any comments on, the issue of swift ending to these misguided wars so that we can redirect the resources, and what implications, if any, are there for research funding, a kind of segue from the last question in a way.
I don't know. I think it's obvious if you are really serious and you really look at the data and understand the climate science and you decide that you want to hit a target, even if you want to hit 550, you probably already have to start thinking about recalling a lot of those military resources. If you choose 450, it's a huge amount. If it's 350, it's a very great deal.
We're against wars.
I think the key thing, though, is you need to get all the vectors aligned, so you need to make sure that the current defense contractors get a big chunk of the solar contracts. Another similar human engineering aspect of this is that the meat, for example, relative to agriculture, it consumes more than 50% in the countries that consume a lot of meat, and it's about 15 times less efficient than getting it from vegetable matter. And if you could engineer either the plants or the humans that eat them so that they get the same pleasure,
sign me up.
Well, I think all of this is going to be driven by innovation, which occurs here and other institutions like this. We need to, and we've been making progress, as I think some of the charts show. It's really not yet at a point where these technologies are cost effective, but the tipping point is not far away, and we can get there more quickly with more innovation, and clearly that's where we should be making the investments. I think in terms of infrastructure, I wouldn't make a bet on a huge singular infrastructure investment. I think we should build a decentralized infrastructure like we're doing in electronics and other fields, so that we can have a lot of competition and innovation in the infrastructure. And
I should say decentralized can be one of the bets, but it is still a bet.
Our last question before we go to our big announcement here in the back there.
Hi. I'd just like to bring up an issue related to the comment just then by Dr. Church and also the abstinence comment by Dr. Griffiths. I've recently found out that one of the 3 largest emitters of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere is the livestock industry. Basically, for example, to produce 1 pound of beef, it requires 16 pounds of plants of soy to feed the cow to produce that amount of beef. So, and 16 pounds of plants can feed 32 people. And also, it produces a lot of methane from the cows through their digestive process. And nitrous oxide.
There you go.
Yeah.
Methane's 23 times more potent than CO2. Nitrous oxide is 300 times more potent than CO2. And obviously, there's also the water usage issues, the energy, and so on and so forth. So, just wondering what
I think you just defined a prize for Peter. So there's the
Yes.
$25,000, or we haven't announced that yet.
So just wondering what your thoughts were on basically the human engineering factors of people just taking on a more plant-based diet or reducing their meat consumption.
a watt hour saved is a watt hour earned.
Well, I think that there's 2 parts. One is just simply changing people's opinion. There are plenty of vegans on the planet already that grow to an old age. But the other part might be engineering the plants and the food industry so that it actually tastes like what people are used to.
You know, it's on a serious note, you know, PETA announced $1 million prize for a meat substitute grown in the...
Yeah, I mean, there have been experiments of creating in vitro meat, which is just like regular meat, but it's grown actually with the efficiency and economic and environment friendliness of vegetables in factories and involves no animal suffering.
Easier to slice on sandwiches.
And PETA has actually come out in favor of this.
But that's a different conversation.
Well, it does affect energy because these are also friendly in terms of energy uses.
Well, I'd like to thank you all again, and if we could just hold on for the last few minutes of our program. Thank you for the answers, gentlemen. We have, for the last exciting portion of our program, I would like to invite on stage a close colleague and friend and collaborator, Lee Stein. Lee is the founder and chairman of XPRIZE Capital, which is one of our partner organizations working with us on energy and environment prizes. Lee, would you please come and tell us for a minute about XPRIZE Capital before we make our announcement?
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, MIT. It is a privilege. I'd like to welcome you and thank all XPRIZE competitors who are here today. It is an honor for XPRIZE Capital to be in a position to sponsor prize competitions. The XPRIZE Capital Earth 2.0 Fund, the investment partnership, respects the amazing vision and accomplishments of the foundation of Erica and of MIT. XPRIZE Capital and its Earth 2.0 Fund realize that the prize mechanism is an innovation search engine, but from an investment standpoint, a prize competition is also a deal generation search engine. But there is a problem. Venture capital normally finances innovation, but prize competitions are designed to solve problems not yet undertaken by the dynamics of the venture industry. Venture capital looks at 3 to 5 year liquidity events. Biotech maybe 8 to 10, and some of the things that we're talking about are outside of those risk dynamics. So we consider prizes to be what we consider to be pre-venture capital, and yet each of you who compete need funding to win the prize. So if prize is pre-venture capital, then you need prize capital, and that means risk mitigation strategies had to be invented in order to capitalize your efforts. So Prize Capital has worked with XPRIZE for 3 years. We have filed patent-pending methodologies to bring capital to you, the earliest of innovators, pre-venture capital financing. So we intend to deploy those methods solving energy and environmental problems. We encourage small-scale, decentralized, distributed methodologies, and we look forward to being the partners of every successful entrant in this room. So thank you, Peter.
You're going to be hearing a lot about Prize Capital as a new mechanism of innovation and financing. And I also want to thank Lee, who is the financial sponsor, Prize Capital, the financial sponsor, about what you're going to hear about next. Remember, the day before something is truly a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. If it wasn't a crazy idea, it's an incremental improvement. So, we'd like to know what your crazy ideas are in the energy environment space. Let's roll the video. So it was $25,000 that spurred Charles Lindbergh to cross the Atlantic in 1927. And we're looking for a 2-minute XPRIZE concept up on a YouTube video. This is being deployed on the front page of YouTube in partnership with them, funded by Prize Capital. On November 15th, we're going to pick the top 3 ideas and put it out for world vote. And that winner will be awarded $25,000. So I look forward to your participation. I'd like to thank Dr. Ernest Moniz, Erica, our distinguished panelists here, and the XPRIZE team for today. Thank you. Please come and be part of us and enjoy. Let's go out there and solve these problems.